Welcome to BIScussions, the podcast where we will explore brain injury support, cognitive rehabilitation, and our mission to raise standards across our industry. I'm Natalie McKenzie, Director, Founder, and Cognitive Rehabilitation Therapist at the BIS Services.
And I'm Eky, Operations and Registered Manager. Each week we're coming together to bring you expert advice, practical tips, and the real stories behind brain injury rehabilitation.
So whether you're a case manager, personal injury solicitor, support worker, rehab assistant, or a family member or client navigating this complex journey, this podcast was built for you. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of BIScussions. Natalie and Eky are back in the studio today, having a conversation this week about the difference between the private litigation work that we do and the statutory and NHS funded work, which have quite different approaches.
Absolutely. Different hats, shall we call them?
Different hats. So predominantly, probably about 90% of the work that we do is Medico-Legal.
Yep.
And then we have a handful of CHC, NHS and local authority funded work.
Yes. You know how I feel.
So I guess let's talk just the general challenges. Cost.
Yep, absolutely. Understanding in terms of when we get an initial referral from maybe statutory, they don't necessarily know sometimes the need, whereas I think when it is referred from a case manager, they've done their INA, sometimes there is a multidisciplinary team already in there, there's already therapy in there, whereas I think, like we've always said, with local authority, we are sometimes the only people providing support. So there's not a very good picture, shall we say, of need and what that should look like. So yeah, we do have to wear, like you always say, the hats, the multiple hats. So
first off then, just from a funding perspective, it's really, really difficult, isn't it? So we do have private medico-legal cases where there is an element of local authority funding in it that is dealt with primarily by the case manager and after a needs assessment by the local authority. Sometimes we have a portion of our support that is paid for by the local authority that is topped up by the claim, or sometimes it's topped up by a client's payment. We have other clients who fund us solely on their direct, their personal budgets. But we have never, ever, ever been able to change the rates. We have changed them, but the rates that we are able to charge are not always consistent with what it costs us. So for full transparency, we have 2 local authority cases that cost us money to support.
Absolutely.
Which anyone listening is like, well, why did you do that? What a business stupid a stupid business decision that is. But these are very long-standing clients that we work with in one particular London borough for 15, 16, 17.
Well, I hope it goes for 20 years, probably
more.
More, yeah.
Yeah, I brought them over from before. So, you know, we are committed to that client. It's very much a maintenance package and it's not rehab anymore. It's still implementation, it's still teaching, it's still learning strategies, it's still safety management, it's still safeguarding. And we, you know, are committed to serving that client, but it does actually cost us money.
Yeah, absolutely.
But because obviously the calibre of staff that we still put in there remains the same. So that's when it's like a maintenance package and actually the calibre of staff is almost, it sounds awful to say, too skilled for that sort of package. But obviously they're the staff that we have.
Okay, but you say that then if you are the multiple hats, having anyone less skilled is even more challenging.
Which comes back to the matching as well. So,
absolutely.
Right? And also, it's quite hard to retain staff at the level at which they are in maintenance packages like that with local authority. And also, we pick up the travel and we pick up any expenses incurred. And again, from a business perspective, not ideal, but we are very much, you know, we're still there to provide. But as you say, when we work in packages where there are no treating teams, you know, there might be a referral into the community neuro rehab team. We've got some that have been 18-month referrals.
Absolutely.
We're in there, 2 RAs, say, 2 cognitive rehab assistants who are skilled, but they're not a speech and language therapist, they're not an OT, and they're not a psychologist, but they're having to deal with all of those needs. Obviously, they get clinical supervision, from BIS, but that's incredibly hard. And I think we've often had very candid discussions of whether or not we still take on that level of work, and we continue to do so, because at the end of the day, we know, and listeners will know, it is a lottery. And if you can get local authority funding to pay for a service like ours to support you with a specialism of brain injury, you take it.
Absolutely. And I think what I struggle most with is the funding postcode lottery, but also the postcode lottery with social workers.
Oh, yeah.
As you may know, that some social workers have some excellent experience and knowledge in brain injury. And if they are brought on, board, they will implement appropriate services, and actually you will have that scaffolding similar to a Medico-Legal, maybe different, but you would have that skill. Whereas some social workers are they're not familiar with brain injury, how that complexity works, and therefore they are just, I suppose, using the same approach as they would with another individual. And I think that's what I struggle with, because I am then having to advocate, and if they're not able to then fund that, or they're not having that understanding, it's just we're not on the same page. And we know when you're on a team working together for this client, if you're not on the same page, it's not going to work.
No. And obviously, like Mark Holloway, Alison Norman and others are doing great work to kind of raise awareness and educate in the social work sector, because you're right that it is a lottery. When I first started doing the work before BIS, it was predominantly statutory funded, and like I remember in Southwark there were like 2 or 3 absolutely brilliant social workers who had such great understanding of brain injury, and when they went and they weren't replaced, it was like I was then, what do you mean these social workers don't know anything about brain injury? And again, I'm pleased to see that there is work out there being done, but from our perspective, it's, I would say, the expectation as well. So the social worker doesn't have the understanding of the nuances of brain injury, issues with insight, awareness, motivation, capacity, the C word, don't really understand that. On top of limited funding, so often we will find that it's only minimum hours.
Absolutely.
And again, that's a business decision, that our minimum hours is what it is. So, if that's what it is, then we take that. But the expectation of the outcomes. So
yes.
we've got packages, don't we, where we say let's say 15 hours statutory funded, but the needs are the same as someone that we have on a 40-hour package elsewhere, with the same expectations of outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it sounds awful, but actually the statutory services clients actually do require a lot more, because they haven't had that maybe acute rehab. And we have had privileges in the last, I think, year or two, where we've joined up with King's College, and we've actually seen that transition, and it's been lovely to see actually how much of the positive outcomes have come from that acute rehab and that kind of transition and that connection. But that we're not always very fortunate with that. No. And that's why that need is so much more stronger when we get to see them in 5 years afterwards. There's so much advocacy needed for that acute phase, and the support needs and intensive rehab needed. But I don't think that the social services understand that. They're all, I get it, it's about funding, but they need to put the funding in to receive the long-term
absolutely, and outcomes. We're all kind of, drumming that drum, aren't we? Beating that drum, whatever the saying is, because, people have to, local authorities need to understand the implications and long-term impact of brain injury and why specialist provision is needed to improve outcomes, to reduce X, Y, Z, things that we know. But I think as well that not just it's not a burden, but the responsibility on line managers and supervisors to be able to
be on effectively 24-hour call. I've got 2-3 social services packages right now, and I'm inundated by the family and the client themselves, because they're not able to have that access to social services. And they need that contact, and unfortunately they're not able to get that response, or that, I suppose, that responsiveness from social services, or I think it's different. They don't have deputies as such. They have kind of like more money management deputyships, and obviously they want answers from them, and they're not also, again, they are inundated with probably hundreds of people wanting the same money questions, but they don't have the resources to be responsive. So who does it fall on? The providers. But also we don't have the funding to be that responsive either, because I've got told off many times from social services saying, why are you doing more than your commissioned hours? But we're like, we can't leave these clients when they're crying for help.
And often we don't charge for that.
Absolutely.
And again, it comes down to that, knowing that you can signpost to say crisis, but most of these clients aren't in crisis.
No.
They don't need to go to, CMHT and have a crisis team. They just need reassurance. But again, we talk all about boundaries all the time. But when there's not a team in there or a case manager that is able to respond, what happens? I mean, effectively, we become the case managers without managing a case or managing a team.
Yeah.
But we become the coordinator. And I think it's needed, of course. But again, it just gives another example of kind of why it's important to have case management and an MDT that is well coordinated and well managed, because we see all the time what happens when that doesn't happen.
Yeah. But when there was wasn't there that new law transition where every brain injury person had to have a case manager? So I'm pretty sure that there should be some level of advocacy for people. Yeah,
and that's just come in, hasn't it? And I think it would be interesting to see where are they going, and who's going to be funding that, because certainly we have mountains to climb just to get our funding that isn't even, the same level. But, and again, it's that the information that we're provided with in the beginning as well is often really poor.
No.
Or false. Or false. We had a client that was been run over, hadn't she, and had clearly quite more like a moderate to severe brain injury. But when the referral came into us, that information didn't even tell us what was the cause of the brain injury, and it was put down as mild and concussive. And only when we stopped doing that, we actually had to withdraw from that from a safety perspective, didn't we? But we then got sent the paperwork about the initial assessment that had happened, that we never got sent despite asking for it. And again, learning there, making sure that we have everything that we need. But we had, and we hadn't got it. But they had put in there about her road traffic accident, and they had put in there some small pieces of information that had we had that in the beginning, we would have said, this is a severe traumatic brain injury with neurobehavioural need, and we would have referred and signposted to a neurobehavioural rehab team or an inpatient. But that hadn't been picked up by the social worker.
No.
Hadn't even had any understanding of that. And actually, it turned out, should have been making a claim. And when we asked the social worker that, she said, they did mention that they're talking to solicitors. And when we scratched the surface a little bit more, I think we did actually have a conversation with another social worker that was known to the family, told us that they were undertaking a claim. But this goes back to making sure you've got the right information and litigators, that they were doing it with kind of a high street, no win, no fee type, with no understanding of brain injury. And we actually went on that law firm's website that was covered in spelling mistakes and didn't actually even understand. They didn't have anything about the rehab, all sorts of things anyway. So this was, again, they were also going through a litigation claim, but the family hadn't divulged that because they didn't want anything to impact being funded by the local authority. But obviously, had they been with a good solicitor, they would have been getting funds and wouldn't have had to rely on minimal hours from the local authority, and could have had that neurobehavioural input. And it again comes back to that education piece and awareness around what social workers, what questions they ask.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, this isn't a social worker bashing session in any way. There's some absolutely brilliant ones there, and we're very fortunate in the medico-legal sector to work with some absolutely brilliant ones. And there's I've seen more independent social workers,
about to say that,
which have been a breath of fresh air, and I'm really, really pleased to see that. And as I say, the work of Alison and Anchor Point and Mark to really change that, because it's so important. Because otherwise, my worry is, there are so many care agencies out there who position themselves as being able to work within the brain injury sector or with brain injury clients and challenging clients, who are the other way to us, probably 90% statutory funding, who would never be able to manage or at least get the outcomes that a client deserves, because they don't understand the needs of that client.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to understand, what is the expectations from social services? I would love to know that, and maybe we get a social worker on as a guest, because for me, yes, we are in there to meet the needs, but they don't. What I've really struggled is having those reviews, having those. We know with brain injury, it's not kind of a time specific injury. It's a lifelong injury, and your injury will evolve with time. Your goals and everything. And I think that's where I see the main difference with private and public sector, like the social services. With MDTs, you're always constantly having reviews of goals. You're constantly looking at actually what other provision can we do? What else can we support you? Then we spoke a lot about independent living trials. What can we showcase that, what long-term needs you have? But with social services, you get deemed, okay, you need 15 hours. I don't know when that's actually reviewed. Very rare.
I mean,
we've had
one client, literally, I think he got reviewed last 2 months ago. And the review was a telephone call. And this is a client who we know very well, who doesn't have capacity.
No, absolutely.
It's a different social worker every year. So they do a call every year. And that's the reassessment of need. And
I find that the most disheartening, that the fact that these clients are funded hours without any real idea of what their outcomes are. And it's more okay, they need something. Let's put this in, and there's no oversight. Like with again, I keep going back. Like with MDTs, they read reports. They are very much more responsive to the CRAs. If there's an incident, okay, how can we come to support? With social services, they don't look at our reports. They don't
actively say to not send the MAC
forms.
And again, maybe it would be really, really great to have a social worker that's working in statutory, not one that's currently in private, but that both actually. That would be a great conversation, because it's not an area that I think I fully understand in terms of what their challenges are, because clearly there's a reason why. And we know it's down to funding, and we know that there's so many cases to pick up that social workers really don't have the allocated time. But I see more and more, used to have an allocated social worker for years. I mean, now it's kind of like they get the support in, and from what we see, our experience, and it might not be the same everywhere, and it might be just under our lens, is that it moves to duty almost immediately once something's been set up. And,
absolutely.
That's really, really difficult. And when there is a change, or our rates go up as they do annually, and they're disagreed with, or they just point blank say no, that's from a finance department. No one's actually having a conversation with the client. No one's actually looking at anything. Yeah.
And that's where I think maybe us understanding how we can better support the social services system. And I would love to have that conversation, because I feel like, absolutely like yourself, there's not enough connection. And we've always said this. I think, we are all there to be joined up and connected to support the client. But again, I think it may be due to funding, maybe due to time constraints, pressures. I know, the social services are really overstretched. Maybe what is it that we can do to support that? I would love that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think from a family perspective, and I think nearly every episode we've covered, we've brought family up in some way, because I think they are really the ones that
they suffer.
I agree. Because there's just not that, obviously, there's groups, there's headways, there's family support groups and all of that. But I don't know. I think there's got to be better statutory funding services for family members. But again, it comes back to education, realising the impact of a person's brain injury is also on their immediate family and community around them.
Agreed.
And that, you know, and again, the work of UKBIF and AVIL and everything like that, you know, to improve that. But I'm worried that we're a long way from getting that. You know, we just hear more and more cuts, and you know, you kind of, and it's awful, isn't it? And it's, when I even say this out loud, it sounds dreadful, but it's kind of like, you know, that. So I have, as you know, I run a brain injury membership that I have people from all over the world in, and a huge amount from the UK. Lots of people have had strokes, aneurysms, hemorrhages, that they all say the same thing to me. There is nowhere for them to go. You know, their local headway has closed, or it's 2 hours away, especially those that live, you know, in more rural areas. So, you know, we have these online meetings and things in community, but even the things that I talk about there and the resources that I give them in the brain injury education and the cognitive rehab, what they say to me is, no one's ever told us this before. And if someone comes to me and works privately with me one-to-one, my first thing is kind of like, have you had a local authority assessment, a carers assessment? No, we didn't know we could have that. And again, you don't know what you don't know.
But I think it just comes down to time. I think I genuinely believe that we are all stretched, even in, like, I don't think there's enough time allocated to individual cases on packages.
No, but I think again, if it's, let's take, so one lady that I work with, she works with me one-to-one. She's also in my membership. She had a stroke. She was in hospital for 2 or 3 weeks. It was very much heavily focused on her physical need. She's got right-sided hemiplegia, and it was only kind of like 4 or 5 weeks after going home that her and her husband realised that cognitively things weren't as they were. Huge emotional dysregulation. It was, but she was home. She'd been discharged. She was seeing physio, not even a neurophysio. She'd seen a physio, and that was it. And, you know, I've worked with her. We've had like 6 sessions, and she's had a full brain injury program tailored to her, presentations, cognitive rehab, education, all of that. And it's 18 months down the line. Wow. And all she wants to know is why she keeps crying, because she's emotionally dysregulated, often because she's cognitively overloaded and fatigued. It never was explained. She was never given a kind of, you know, there's headways. We all say, not another bloody leaflet. She didn't even get the leaflet.
Yeah, that's it.
And was never assessed as having any need. And then another couple that are in my group, husband and wife couple, he had a very significant stroke. Almost non-verbal. Memory is effectively wiped each night, very, very impaired in that regard. And they're having to fund everything privately. And they had a one-to-one with me, and I said, you know, have you had the carers assessment, P? She was like, what do you mean, have I had a carers assessment? And I said, well, who's funding Headway? And she was like, well, we pay. But even then, that wasn't joined up.
But why is it not joined up? But there was meant to be this whole rehab prescription, and there's meant to be this whole kind of pathway. And again, you know, I really struggle with this idea of what are we missing? What is it that's needed?
And again, this is the brilliant work that you know, UKBIF and other organisations are doing, and we try hard to get involved in as well, because it's so frustrating, isn't it? And listeners can probably hear it in our voice. You know, it's like, but why? You know, and when you've been in a sector so long, like we have, it's kind of like, I'm sad, and we're still having these conversations. And yes, more people are surviving. Yes, there's more need. Yes, there's less money. But still, why is the needle not moving enough? And again, maybe that's an expectation on our part. Maybe the needle is moving more than we know. Yeah. You know, I think we have to think about that.
I would love for that to be the case.
Yeah, maybe it is. But I guess because of the work that we do, we see it earlier and we see the impact earlier, and I guess our lens is our lens, as it were, and that's what we see. So I'd love to hear that kind of, what has changed, what is improving. And obviously the UKBIS Summit, every year we get updates of where we are, and you always hear the same frustration about what's happening with the ABI report and things. And I think we're all sharing the same frustration, but we will continue to do the work and be aware.
But I do want to say, like, the positive of social services work, I don't want it to all feel that it's negative. Like, I think the one positive that comes out of doing social services work is that the client is at the centre. And I don't mean that it's not in the MDTs, but because there is no other disciplines, we are the only people in there. We do get to listen to the voice of the client and actually advocate. So that is one thing. And it's lovely to see their journey. With such minimal hours, they do make sometimes great progress. So it's not that they can't make progress. I'm just thinking, if they were given the amount of hours that they actually truly needed, think of the progress.
Well, that's exactly why we're running the research project, to evidence actually what is the optimal amount of hours for maximal rehab goal attainment, because I think that can help in both sectors. Actually, what do you need each week from what provision? That's the important thing. Because again, that's that distinction between 15 hours of local authority support work and care has a very different outcome to 15 hours of local authority just rehab.
That's a separate research.
But an interesting conversation. But we as we say, we take on the local authority work. We do local authority and litigation work together, where as we said earlier, it's kind of co-funded. That works out brilliantly because again, there's a case manager, but we certainly don't shy away from it, but we are much more kind of aware of what the needs of the client are. And I think again, it's that good evidence base, it's good history taking, making sure that you're getting the right information, because we've got to keep the client, the family and the staff safe. So that is important. Thank you. See you on next week's episode of BIScussions.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of BIScussions. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring, and we continue to explore ways to raise the standard of brain injury and support and cognitive rehabilitation. If you have enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an update. And if you know someone who might benefit from this conversation, feel free to share it with them. For more resources, insights and information about BIS Services, please visit our website www.thebis.co.uk. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook. Thanks once again.